Now in this part we'll talk about the accessory organs of the female reproductive system. We'll talk about the internal first, followed by the external. So the internal accessory organs are the fallopian tube, the uterus, and the vagina. And here you can see them out of the body, where we'll talk first about the fallopian tube. It's made out of the fimbria, which are these finger-like projections. These finger-like projections are going to take that ovulated egg. Here you can see the ovulated egg made out again of the secondary oocyte, surrounded with that zona pellucida, and a whole crown of follicular cells that we call the corona radiata. Now that ovulated egg will be picked up by these finger-like projections that we called fimbria, and will be taken into this funnel-shaped area of the fallopian tube known as the infundibulum. Now the rest of the fallopian tube, that duct will connect to the inside of the uterus. So you want to be familiar with all of the different names of the uterine tube. There are the fallopian tubes, or the oviducts as well. They are responsible for transported the ovulated egg. The funnel-shaped area is known as the infundibulum, and again it has these finger-like projections known as the fimbria. The fimbria are very close to the ovaries, and they are responsible for picking up that egg once it's ovulated. The uterine tube is lined with mucosa that has cilia, and the cilia have a wavy movement in the direction of the uterus. So it helps the transport of the fertilized egg towards the uterus, which means that these cilia move in the opposite direction of the sperms, which also means that the sperms would have to overcome the movement of that cilia in order to reach the egg. And the whole process of fertilization actually occurs inside of the uterine tube. Now the uterus is a hollow muscular organ. It receives the embryo and sustains it until delivery. It is attached to the pelvic wall by very large ligaments known as the broad ligament and the round ligament of the uterus. As for the regions of the uterus is the majority of the uterus is made out of the body. Okay, it makes the upper 2/3 of the uterus, including that dome-shaped upper part known as the fundus. The lower part of the uterus is known as the cervix, and that projects into the upper part of the vagina. The uterus has 3 layers. The innermost layer is known as the endometrium, which is the mucosal lining, and this is the layer that is shed every month during menstruation. The middle layer is made out of strong, smooth muscle fibers, and that layer is known as the myometrium. Then the outermost layer is the serosal lining, and that is called the perimetrium. The vagina is a fibromuscular tube that extends from the cervix all the way to the vaginal orifice towards that is at the outside of the body. It is important to convey all of the secretions or the menstruation that comes out through the uterus. It also receives the penis during intercourse and is a passageway for delivery. At the very top, you'll find where the cervix is invaginated into the upper part of the vagina, and surrounding it we have these little pouches all around, and those pouches are known as the fornix or fornices, which again is a little recess between the upper vaginal wall and the cervix. The vaginal orifice, that again is towards the outside, that is partially enclosed by a hymen pre-sexual activity. The hymen is made out of stratified squamous epithelium and a thin layer of connective tissue. The vagina has 3 different layers. So the inner layer, that is a mucosal lining. It's also covered with stratified squamous epithelium, which is the same layer of skin. As you can see here, that it has lots of ridges. And then there's a middle muscular layer made out of smooth muscle fibers, and then an outer fibrous layer. Now for the external reproductive organs, you can see the urethra, and you can see the vaginal opening posterior to it. This area between the urethral orifice and the vaginal opening is known as the vestibule. This whole area is known as the vulva, and it's made out of the labia majora, the labia minora, the clitoris, and the vestibular glands. These vestibular glands are very small, and they are related to the vestibule. So we'll talk first about the labia majora, which is this round pad of fat found on either sides. The pad of fat unites anteriorly above the symphysis pubis, and that area is known as the mons pubis. The labia majora is the female equivalent of the scrotum in males. It's made out of skin, subcutaneous fat, and the skin is very hairy in this area. Internal to that, there is the labia minora, which are flattened folds made out of skin, lots of blood vessels, and anteriorly, the two labia minora connect to make a clitoris. The clitoris is a small projection between the two labia minora, and it corresponds to the male penis. It has two columns of erectile tissue that correspond to erectile tissue in the male penis. Now the vestibule is the part between the two labia minora that encloses the urethra, the urethral opening and the vaginal opening. There are glands there known as vestibular glands, and those release mucus during sexual stimulation. Erection, lubrication, and orgasm, they kind of correspond to a lot of the things that we talked about when we discussed the male system. So erection that happens is under the control of the parasympathetic stimulation, where the erectile tissue in the clitoris and around the vaginal opening are going to respond to sexual stimulation. The nitric oxide, which was that gas neurotransmitter that comes out, will lead to the dilation of the arteries, which brings more blood into the area, leading to that erection. Now, lubrication occurs due to the sexual stimulation of the vestibular glands that produce mucus and help in the lubrication of the vagina, and that helps in intercourse. Orgasm is under the sympathetic control, where there is these rhythmic contractions of the perineal muscles, the muscles of the uterus, and the muscles of the uterine tube, all of that in order to help the transport of the sperm towards the egg. Now in the next part, we'll talk about the hormonal control of the female reproductive organs.